Well, that's our first conversation this morning on the Constitution Review. Of course, for those who have been following it. Well, two gentlemen join us this morning to have a conversation around this. Right Honorable Onofiok Luke is a member of the House Ad hoc Committee on Constitution Review. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ayo. Good to have you.
Also joining us from Abuja studio is John Mutu, who is National Coordinator, Democracy Vanguards, and also a parliamentarian, a legislative consultant. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Makinde. Good morning, Nigerians.
Well, Honorable, let's begin with you on this. You'll forgive me if I begin with something that I consider a little disturbing, and you must have heard us talking about the education segment of our national life. As we on strike, universities and all of that, and they don't seem to be getting due attention as and when. I'm wondering, was this in any consideration at all in all of the process that you talked about?
Good morning, Ayo, and good morning, Nigerians. And I want to say that, though these issues like the ASU strike that just started, we had already done some considerations on constitutional alterations before then. But there is one provision that we had to look at, and I want to say that I'm just here on invitation. I'm not speaking for the ad hoc committee, and speaking as an individual here, and I have to make that point clear because I don't have the mandate of the ad hoc committee to speak. But as a member of that committee, you see that there are certain provisions of the Constitution that are non-justiciable, Chapter 2, and one of them is the educational objectives for policies of government. And so we've tried in our little way, part of the alteration is to make education a human right, a fundamental human right. And so there is that provision, and there is that provision in our alteration, in our document, in the report that was submitted to the House at plenary, seeking to make education a fundamental human right. And but to what extent of education? And we know that you cannot build in law. They say you cannot put something on nothing. The very critical point of education is the primary level, the elementary level, and the basic level. And I know that government at the state and at the federal have been trying to do some level of investment there. So there has to be a constitutional alteration. There has to be a constitutional framework. The rejigging of the ground norm to give the citizens the right, that inalienable right for them to seek redress where they feel that they have not been provided enough. So there is that provision in the constitutional alteration to make universal basic education a fundamental human right for Nigerians.
You referenced the Constitution. Of course, it is there. 18.3 of the current one talks about the fact that government shall strive to eradicate illiteracy, and to this end, government shall, as and when practicable, provide free primary education. You talked about that. Free secondary education, free university education, and free adult literacy program. One of the questions that will naturally come to anyone is, government shall strive. In other words, if that's at the whim of government. They may do it, they may not do it, and they would not be opposing, they would not be against the Constitution if it doesn't happen. So is there any way the National Assembly, in your personal opinion, as you have said, is there any way the National Assembly, do you think that the National Assembly, given the powers that it has, can do anything to compel, action to foster education in the country? Because if we don't do that right, we are not serving the interest of the nation in the long run.
Yeah, so that I don't misinform, I might not know the exact wordings of that provision that, the new provisions in the altered Section 18. Okay. But part of what we are doing and we are seeking to do is to see how we can try to do away with that clause as soon as practicable, and to try to get education at that basic level, the secondary level, the elementary level. I can speak for sure of that, to make it an inalienable right of the citizen. And with that, that means that even citizens can begin to seek redress. Even citizens can begin to leverage on such provision to ask and demand from government, the provision of basic education. I will not, because I've not, like I said, things are done in structured manner. I will not be able to bring the document of the National Assembly that we have not voted on to begin to bear term. If I were to have opportunity, I would be able to speak directly to that specific provision, but I know that there is that provision to make education a fundamental human right.
Okay, so in terms of yes or no, before we get into the meat now, does that provision, will it change the fortunes of education in Nigeria?
I want to believe it will, in the sense that why do we make law? We make law to fill the lacuna, to cure any mischief that we have seen. We've seen that there is a great challenge in the educational system of Nigeria because we have left education to maybe the latitude of for the policymakers, the policy formulators, to be at liberty to take a decision. And that is why you can see some cases, some policy formulators, some policy makers, and some people in charge of education system, sometimes, with due respect to some who have given their heart out to make sure that the education system works, sometimes they give a lackadaisical attitude and they give excuses. So my answer is yes, that with this is a step in the right direction. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And so with this, we know that maybe subsequent legislature, maybe the 10th National Assembly, maybe the Houses of Assembly will begin to build upon this. And we are not there yet, but I want to believe that with God on our side and with commitment and passion on the side of us, because I don't want to exclude myself, us, those of us saddled with the responsibility of managing public lives of Nigerians. With commitment and passion and sincerity of purpose, we would answer that question in the affirmative.
Now, all of this is dependent on whether or not this amendment process or review process sails through. And I recall when all of this started with the 9th Assembly, the Committee for Senate was announced in, February 2020. The House Committee came much later, in October of the same year. But we didn't hear anything until you started crisscrossing, the states for, hearings and all that. And I think that was in May, June of last year. And then there was a lull again up until now when we heard that it's been submitted, and then there will be all of that process. Can you help us fill those gaps? Because for a lot of people, they're thinking, maybe this is being put off to last minute, and then it will be carried over to, as you said, the 10th Assembly or whichever one. Help us fill in the gaps. How did this take this long? Because for some people, it should have happened already.
Okay, the action we have taken, the law, as you have said, according to you, it's because of the fact that if you want to be kind to us, you'd agree with us that there were yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians for certain provisions of the law to be put in place. One, let's not lose sight of the fact that we needed to reform the oil and gas industry, the petroleum industry in the country. And so there was much pressure on us to be able to pass the Petroleum Industry Act. And you know that much energy was put into that. We had challenges, and we had to marry the interest of the host communities, the interest of government, and the back and forth before we could settle and enact the Petroleum Industry Act. And even up to now, some persons, especially where I come from, the Niger Delta, are still not comfortable with the percentage given to host communities. And so with that done, we were able to pass that so that we could give a direction, because there was a cloud of uncertainty around the oil and gas industry with the back and forth of the Petroleum Industry Act. And that's why we could not have the level of investment in the oil and gas industry that we ought to have had. And so that took our time. Then came the electoral reform, amendment to the Electoral Act. Nigerians wanted some amendment that would guarantee free, credible elections. And you give it to us at the National Assembly that we devoted our time and passion to make sure that that happens. And then the Appropriation Act. And other issues, we had issues of NSAS, and which we had to address, and picking from the challenges from the field, we had to do some rejigging, like the National Human Rights Commission. We have to rejig the act to be able to accommodate certain things. So the law, the reason for the law was because there were other pressing national issues that we had to attend to, and we didn't back out. And so, having finished with those issues, We felt, and we've passed the Electoral Act, awaiting Mr. President's assent. The next thing we feel we should do is to make sure that we have the constitutional alteration come on the table. And I believe that it's coming at the right time. And we've come this far. We've had consultation. We have led the report. We are debating on the report on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we have had the chambers set up in the House of Representatives under the able leadership of Right Honourable Femi Gbajabiamila and the entire leadership. They have prepared the chambers to make sure that we go for electronic voting so that every man would answer his father's name on every issue.
All right, let's take this to Abuja. Mr. Mutu, I know that you have worked with the members of the National Assembly in both chambers for quite a while. So I'm wondering, from where you sit, from your own standpoint, consulting with them and all of that, working with them, what are some of the challenges that you think, well, maybe have been worked at for quite a while, but could still have been done better? Honorable Luke here has spoken to some of the reasons for the law, which, many people have been wondering, is this ever going to happen? What are some of those challenges that Nigerians may, in your opinion, not be aware of that lawmakers have to contend with?
Okay, thank you so much, Ayo, for that very, very important question. Like you know, governance is a very, very tedious process. It requires a lot of consultations. It requires a lot of reflection. It requires a lot of networking, and before decisions are finally made. And like as a privileged insider, I'm aware of some of the issues that Right Honourable Luke actually mentioned. For some of us, we'll have preferred that maybe or would have wished that this process had ended before now. But unfortunately, we are here today, but it is better late than never. Like you said, there are other issues that perhaps those outside may not be privy to. But like I said, we are moving into an election period. People are now maybe more focused on election issues. The zeal with which Nigerians engage the constitutional review process, attended the public hearings and all that had waned because people had expected immediate action. But due to other considerations, like you rightly noted, other priorities that has taken the time of the legislature, maybe we found ourselves where we are today. We're here, let's focus on what is on the table rather than looking backwards. Let's just hope that the process is taken forward quickly and concluded within the shortest possible time. From the schedule I've seen from the National Assembly, the plan is to make sure that the voting is concluded by next week, and this is transmitted to the State Houses of Assembly for the ratification. That is where the action should be moving towards. That's where everybody should be focused. How can we start engaging with the legislature at the state level to ensure that we get the 2/3, 24 Houses of Assembly voting positively on those issues that are on the table for amendment.
Well, one
other issue that I also know that must have also contributed to some of the delays is the COVID pandemic. That also created a lot of challenges for the legislature at some point. But let's move on. I think that's what I would say at this point.
Well, while all those are valid, Mr. Mutu, there are those who are also wondering how much politics will influence some of the decisions that has been made or may be made in this process. Remember that in the process of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, there was that consideration, as far as many people are concerned, that some decisions in the law were politicized, whether or not correctly or I don't know. But so how much of this, how much do you think politics plays a role in this particular process of the constitutional review process? Don't also forget that there is going to be voting. Do you have fears, concerns as an individual that some of the voting may be along party lines or some other sentiments?
Thank you so much. I didn't hear the last part of your interventions. Maybe it was a network glitch. But I heard the first part of the question where you talked about politics. You can never discountenance politics in lawmaking process, because it is more or less a give and take. It's a consultative process where people canvass different opinions, people canvass different viewpoints. But the most important thing is at the end of the day, we should be aiming towards building consensus that will be beneficial for the greater good of Nigerians. The Constitution is the most important document, it's the ground norm of this country, and it also provides for the constitutional arrangement, the governance arrangement of this country. It's also responsible for the distribution of resources. So any attempt to amend the Constitution, any section of the Constitution, will require a lot of consultation, will require a lot of politicking, a lot of lobbying. Like Right Honorable Luke said, and in your opening statement, you saw that the First Lady of the Federal Republic of Nigeria had to come to the chamber yesterday to continue with the advocacy, to continue with the lobby to ensure that some of the issues that are canvassed are given favorable response. The legislature, that is why it is divided into various constituent districts, constituent units. In the Senate, we have senatorial district, while in the House of Reps, we have federal district. Each member is coming with a bucket of demand. Each member's responsibility is to ensure that he is able to attract as much as possible to his constituency. So a member's primary allegiance is to his immediate constituency. And that is why the people will tell you, we sent you there, you are there to represent us. So if any member is speaking in that chamber, his first consideration is that, do we stand to lose anything by this amendment? What is this amendment bringing to my federal district or my senatorial district? No matter how plausible that reform may be, if it's going to shortchange its people, it would definitely want to resist it. Whether it is for the greater good of the entire, but if the people will lose that benefit, it definitely will stand to continue to resist that. But like we said, minority will have in politics and in democracy, minority will have their say, but the majority will have their way. But the most important thing is, let's build consensus. Whatever decision we are going to be taking should be such that it does not harm and no one is left behind. Majority should not just bamboozle the minority and let their wishes continue to dominate at all times. But for the sake of harmony and peace in the country, consensus should be built around the issues. And that is why the amendment process for the Constitution is made so stringent that before any item is amended, you must get the number. For the Constitution, according to Section 9, you must, for voting to take place and for any item to be amended, you must get at least 2/3 majority voting in the affirmative. And that is why both chambers, to remove those ambiguities, have maybe opted to use electronic voting to ensure that they get that minimum threshold. The same thing, for any of those amendments to also scale through, it must get to must be ratified by at least 24 houses of assembly before any of those amendments can go through. So you can never discountenance politics in this, but it's how we discuss, how we consult, how we all discuss together to ensure that at least we are all on the same page. Well, the primary purpose is to ensure that Nigeria is better for it.
Right. We'll
are they going to be voting along political lines? I've not seen that, because the Constitution Committee, the ad hoc committee, is comprised of all political parties, and they are all working towards that.
Okay, let's bring this to Lagos now. I mean, you've talked about the process. We'll still get into the lobbying perspective and all of that, but let's dig into this one, because it's a big deal, a really big deal, and at the heart of it is the conversation around restructuring. In fact, a lot of people are really interested in this because of the possibilities that this might have on the structure of Nigeria as a nation. I'd like you to tell us, because restructuring has different definitions for different people. There's the talk about what states creation, powers of the state, resource control. People feel marginalized. In fact, people from your region, Southeast, Southwest, there's a lot of feeling of marginalization. So restructuring really means different things to different people. And I'm glad that, I mean, you're former Speaker of a State Assembly before you went to the National Assembly. So you have a sense of the feelings at the state level and now at the national level. How does this, review process define restructuring? And in what areas are we likely to see those structures or restructuring?
It's a big national issue, a big national question. We agree. But personally, this is a personal view. With this constitutional alteration has not been able to capture much of the yearnings for restructuring has been agitated for and has been canvassed for by Nigerians, and some irrespective of where they come from. But I will speak first to the issues that have been captured under the devolution of power. Some, for me, restructuring should be devolution of more powers to the other component unit of the geographical entity in called Nigeria. When I talk about other component unit, the state and the local government. And so I will start with the state. Personally, I sponsored a bill seeking for the establishment of state police, which is part of the agenda under devolution of power and what other people might term restructuring. And that did not scale through, and it got defeated. And personally, I felt that the yearnings and aspiration of Nigerians at that level was not captured. But
for you, if you don't mind me butting in, what reasons would you say were adduced for shooting down the bill that at that time? Like I said, I'm not speaking for the committee, and like I said, there are what we call what do they call privilege of parliamentary communications. I would not speak to why, the reason why, but many reasons were adduced. There are persons who felt that too many powers in the hands of the chief executive at the state at this point, with the experience they've had so far, is going to be inimical to democracy. That's to them. And others said, oh, the state is already overburdened with so much bureaucracy, and to fund another bureaucracy in the position of a state police and state police commission would be additional burden on the state finances. But before then, like I said, there are other issues that has been captured under devolution of power, though not to the extent we expected. Like I said, I sponsored a bill seeking to delist maritime from the exclusive legislative list in the second schedule of the Constitution to the concurrent list, so that the states can share in the power making, share the powers of making law for the establishment of deep sea port. Why did I do this? I have seen the outcome. I have seen the importance of the latitude that we're given in the issue of power generation, where we are, using my state for an instance. I will come to that after. So, like maritime was not captured, which we believe that it was captured. Like, for instance, my state since 1999 has been battling to establish a deep sea port. And I know what that would mean to Nigerian economy. My first governor, Kitobon Victor Ta, conceptualized it. The second, in this fourth republic, then Senator Kpabio set up a mechanism to seek to achieve it, and then Governor Odom came and has put in a mechanism to achieve it, and then they've gotten investors, and then we had to wait for the federal government, because it's still on the exclusive legislative list. We had to wait for the federal government to give us approval for the full business case. If we were to legislate on that, imagine where we would have been. We had investors who were ready to invest, but because of the time delay to give approval. And so that is part of restructuring and devolution of power that has not been captured. But there are other areas. Thank God that we've been able to capture railway. Railway issue of the State House of Assembly now, in our proposal, will be able to make laws for the establishment, for the maintenance of railway in their state. We've equally delisted airport in the present proposal. Delisted airport from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list. So the state government the State House of Assembly can make laws today for the establishment, maintenance of airport in their state. Then the other one is in the area of power generation. We know that power is critical to development. Power is critical to any economy. And the greatest challenge we've had today in manufacturing sector in this country is the cost of power, cost of energy, which has impacted negatively on the output of production. And so power is key. Before now, in item number 14 on the concurrent legislative list, the State House of Assembly, presently, the State House of Assembly could only make law to establish, for the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity
in the state within the areas that are not covered by the national grid. With our present proposal, we've deleted that within the areas not covered by the national grid. That means that the State House of Assembly can now make laws for generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity within the state, even within areas that have been covered by the national grid.
Did you also factor in, my apologies, was it also factored in the investments that the transmission companies and the generation companies have made? Don't answer that yet. Let's take a short break to answer some of those things. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. Honorable, you were talking about the suggestion, because that's where it is now, right? A proposition, proposal in the review document. You're talking about the power sector, and I'm wondering what then will be the role of the federal government in this space. Is that also factored in? How is that factored in? Because there are those who are wondering, the transmission company is an exclusive federal government thing. Gencos have, federal government has some stake in that one as well, and all of that. Yeah.
Making an issue into the concurrent list does not preclude the National Assembly from making legislations on those areas. And by way of our positioning, the positioning of the legislature in Nigeria is in such a way that where any law made by any state is in matters in the concurrent list, the laws made by the National Assembly has precedence over the ones that has been made by state. So any law made by state should not be should not be at variance with the provisions of the Act of the National Assembly. And so I believe that with that provision, and then with that latitude, and with that retaining power of the National Assembly to make laws too, even on matters on concurrent list, because we're not talking about residual list. They share powers to make law here. I believe that the legislation of the National Assembly will be able to cater for those issues.
Honorable.
You were speaking, you talked about, I was speaking about some level of restructuring to the proposals we have. Like I've mentioned railway. There is this other issue too, correctional and custodial services, which is purely within the ambit of the federal legislature.
Honorable, there are so many issues that we would love to, talk about on this issue, and but I'm just wondering. First of all, how many laws will the Constitution will be affected by this provision, this review document that you have made for the Constitution? Because you're talking about, the power sector, for instance, now, and it brings me to the law that set up the NERC and so many others like that. So how many laws of the Federation are going to be affected by this Constitution review document?
That is, data is key now. And so if you're speaking now, you must speak with data. I have not done that research personally to speak authoritatively to know on the aggregation of laws that are going to be affected by this amendment. But what I can say is that this is a ground norm.
My apologies. Is that to say that those were not factored in, or you just, because this is the ground norm, it has to supersede every other?
No, it has been, when I said it has been factored in, I am speaking about myself here now. Okay. I think generality, as a committee, I think we factored that in. But what I meant is that I might not, you've spoken about the National Electricity Regulatory Commission Act.
Establishment.
And then I was trying to speak about the issue of the delisting of correctional services from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent legislative list. So that means automatically that the act setting up the National Correctional Services and custodial services is going to, one way or the other, be impacted. But since it is a national legislation, whatsoever the state will do, granted the provisions of the Constitution, will not in any way be in conflict with the national legislation or the act. And where such happens, we know that the act of the National Assembly take precedence.
Right. So we're going to Abuja in a moment, but just before we go, I want to understand this, because you're close to the process. So I recall there was a call for memoranda as much as you can. I think you had hundreds coming from different areas. There was a moving around states as well to conduct public hearings, to hear from the people. But I know some of the issues you've talked about that are not captured were raised, either by those memoranda, by the public hearings, and now they're not captured. So how did we come to this final, and I say we because anyway, I'm a Nigerian and I have representatives in the National Assembly, but let me just say, how did you, the National Assembly, come to the final, recommendations, the amendments that were made? Who was in charge of capturing what, saying, okay, this one doesn't fly, okay, this one should be included? How did that happen?
The process of constitutional amendment, just like legislation, has it has a process. First process is by the presentation of a bill. And so these are, what we have proposed before the National Assembly today are a product of individual member bills or bills sponsored by civil society, and then members have to take it and then own it as private member bills and then present it before the National Assembly. Members equally had their own private member bills. And so most of those issues were raised as bills. And let's not lose sight of the fact that every of the proposals that we have here is a product of a bill. And some of those bills did not scale through second reading. Like I made mention of the issue of delisting of maritime from exclusive legislative list, which I personally had as a bill. It did not scale through. It died at the second reading stage. And so that is what happened to some of the proposals that were raised at that level. And just like my brother John Mutu said, there are interests. People factor in the interest of their constituents. People factor in, unfortunately, right now we are becoming more of regional Nigerians, state Nigerians than nationals. And so because of that, we begin to look at the interests of where we come from, sometimes sacrificing it on the altar of national interest, and because maybe of the lessons that each and every one of us from every segment have passed through. So some of those issues did not scale through second reading. And so what scaled through second reading is what we considered at the ad hoc committee, because the process is first reading, second reading, and then to the ad hoc committee on constitutional review, which was chaired by the Deputy Speaker in the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Ahmed Idris Owase. And with that, we took our report, having met with the consultants, senior advocate of Nigeria, civil society, as part of our consultant, as part of our faculty. We now took it and had a joint sitting with the Senate. And so Senate came with their proposition on the bills that has scaled through second reading. We came with our own proposition. At that joint sitting, we now voted on and agreed and disagreed on some issues. And so what was submitted was a product of the joint sitting of both houses and a product of a consultative meeting with the Conference of Speakers. That happened when I was the speaker in the last dispensation, and it has happened again when I think weekend before last, the ad hoc committee met with, and then the Speakers Conference, representing the interest of the state legislatures, made an input. And so what we have presented, what was tabled, the report that was laid at the table by the Right Honorable Idris Wase, is a product of this process. And so some of those issues that did not see the light of the day were those ones that did not scale through. So nobody took a personal decision to say, the committee did not take a personal decision to say, no, I'm not going to vote on this, I'm not going to vote on this. We only take a decision based on the outcome, the output of the process, the normal process of lawmaking of the National Assembly. And that is why we have had the product.
Okay, let me bounce this off Mr. Mutu in Abuja. So to what extent, then, can we say this is representative of the yearnings of the people? If we had people submit memoranda, not just people, groups, CSOs, we had public hearings across the country, and some of those issues raised, like state police and the rest, are not captured. So to what extent can we really say this process is representative of what the people want?
Thank you so much. Reform is an incremental process. It's a continuous process. You cannot achieve everything in one day. People have advocated for issues, submitted memoranda, but that issue that you have submitted has to go through a process, like Right Honorable noted. It started from when the issues were submitted. The consultants were asked to sit down and aggregate those issues. For those that were not captured in the bills, as referred to by Right Honorable Luke, were brought forward as fresh bills sponsored by the committees for consideration by the entire legislature. So that process of consultation, that process of trade-off and continuous advocacy is what has led to what we have today. Because you have submitted a proposal does not necessarily mean that it will go through and will succeed. You just have to continue to follow. And I was really surprised. I was fortunate to be part of the public hearings, both at the zonal and at the national level. A lot of people submitted proposals and went to sleep. You don't just submit your proposal, make and go and sleep. You have to continue to engage and continue to consult and continue to lobby for those items. If you are asking for restructuring, what is the specific aspect of restructuring? There are those who are asking for restructuring based on zonal based. Nigeria should be divided into 6 geopolitical zones. There are others who are asking for creation of more states. So there were divergent views. So how do you harmonize all those views to come up with an acceptable bill that will go through the, and maybe you remember, policy formulation is a game of numbers. Who are those that are in support of it? And if those in support of it, based on what information are they advocating for those issues? So Nigerians should learn from this exercise that when you're advocating for any policy or you want any specific reform, you have to engage in the process from the beginning to the end. Don't just submit the list and go back and sleep. I remember
Mr.
in the case of the traditional, even after the advocacy, the public hearing, they continue to engage with the leadership, continue to sensitize Nigerians and the leadership on why it's important for this amendment to go through. Well, so I would say, because you have submitted a proposal, now, does not mean it will automatically.
All of this that you are saying, Mr. Mutu, while it is valid, you don't go to sleep when you drop a proposal and all of that, but it is the job of some people. Some people have been employed by Nigerians to do some jobs. Consider these, bills, propositions, and all of that. So I'm wondering, how will people be able to take ownership of a process that they do not feel justifies their interests? I think that's part of the question that my colleague is asking. How will people be able to take ownership of this and say, this is actually a document of we the people, when we do not have, we do not feel that all of the things that we really want, the state police issue, for instance, local government autonomy, full autonomy, and all of those things are not captured the way we want them to be captured?
Yes, thank you. I share those sentiments completely, but we're talking about the reality. I am a Nigerian. I am also on the streets. I would love all, because I also add issues that I would have loved to go into the constitutional amendment. But like I said, it's a process. Everybody's wishes cannot be captured in the Constitution. Everybody's reform issues can never be captured because it has to go through the process. Only a few. Otherwise, even God does not answer all prayers at the same time. Because one will be saying that kill this man. The other one is saying, God, save me. Where do we build consensus? So what I'm trying to say is that in policy formulation, in policy reform like the constitutional amendment, everything can never be achieved in one day. That's why I say we have achieved some today. Let the process continue. We'll continue to push. And that is why every constitutional amendment, every assembly that comes in, create that opportunity for those reforms that were not captured in the preceding amendment will now be considered. Local government reform in 2000 started right from the first amendment. But today we are getting more acceptance from even those who were resisting it then. And our prayer is that those local government reforms that are being taken forward today scale through the light of day. Next amendment will now be looking at what are the remaining issues that need to be taken forward. And that is why I say the reform process is a journey. It can never be concluded in. And I don't want Nigerians to feel that because what we advocated for did not go through, does not mean that the National Assembly didn't take our issues forward. And I want to quickly say, I am from the South-South. I would have loved the issue of derivation to go into the Constitution. But it's also a game of numbers. I have those sentiments. I share those sentiments. But when it comes to the table for decisions to be taken, the member who represent, or the members who represent the South-South, advocated passionately for those issues. But when it is now bent against other interests at that point in time, you have to trade off on some and gain some. That does not mean that the members or the legislators from the South did not represent their people effectively. And that is the whole beauty of democracy. And that is why I said we have to continue to build consensus. Citizens have to continue to pursue and bring pressure to bear on those who will be taking decisions in the course of the engagement.
Dale, now, Honourable Luke, I'd like you to end on this note, and that's looking forward. We'll maybe look back a bit. There are those who think we need a new constitution altogether, but clearly we're going the amendment way. Governor Makinde of your state, you may have heard the statement he made about, this is a waste of time, and according to him, he says, what we're fighting for is central to the development of this country. States should be able to enforce the laws in their state. Now, that was last year. He was responding to, the public hearings. So that's on the one hand, those that think, well, this is a waste of time. And two is, coming off the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, is still before the president now. We know what happened the previous time. He returned it. Do you have the commitment of the president that, once all of this is done, it will sail through? Or will the president return it again and then probably push this to the next administration?
Let me start with the last issue. I am not the representative. I'm not the special advisor to President on National Assembly matters, House of Reps. So I might not speak about that commitment of Mr. President. I believe that Nigerians can say whether we have the commitment of Mr. President to do that. But I want to believe that it's my belief that every leader with the sincerity of purpose and for the betterment of the life and the good of the place he leads would always want to act in a manner that would bring good for the people within that community. And I want to say that Mr. President should not, and I don't think he's an exception to that belief of mine. And so on constitutional amendment, there are critical issues that have come up in our proposal. We've had some serious issues. We've had proposals on judicial reforms. For instance, we are proposing the composition of the Court of Appeal today says it should not be President of the Court of Appeal and such other justices of the Court of Appeal not less than 49. And then we are proposing not less than 100. We know the challenges that we are faced in this country with the shortage of manpower in the judiciary and the burden that is on judicial officers. We are still on judiciary reforms. We've had the issue of too many appeals lying as of right to the Supreme Court, and that has brought a burden on the court, brought a burden not only the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal. And so we are looking at a situation where maybe justices of the Supreme Court and justices of the Court of Appeal can dispense of leave to appeal in chambers, maybe 3 justices of the Court of Appeal, 3 justices of the Supreme Court. Part of the reform we are proposing here. And then reforms even to strengthen institutions like the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission. We are strengthening that commission to ensure that accruals, remittances are made. We've had issues of complaints of certain agencies not making remittances of accruals to the Federation account. So that proposition is to strengthen that institution, to act and then to look at the books of agencies who should remit accruals to the Federation account. So many other proposals. Yeah, so many, like the women participation in politics, like affirmative action.
I just wanted to even ask you before we close, which of these, you talked about the revenue, judiciary, women in politics, which of these 64, 68 recommendations?
Yeah, 67 recommendations.
67 recommendations. Which of these would you say was the most controversial in the entire process?
The most controversial, some of them that were the most controversial.
Okay, how many, which of them would you say were controversial in the process?
Most of them has not found expression in our final report, like the state police. Yeah, those were the controversial ones. And then the ones you've seen that have found expression is where the ones that we have come on, both the Senate and the House of Reps have come to agreement with. And so, just like you said, to end, yes, I was not in the National Assembly, in the last assembly, 7th Assembly, 8th Assembly. And I heard about the reforms that were made. And so it's my place in the 9th Assembly to be able to make my own little contribution, because I don't intend to go back to the National Assembly. Yeah, I don't intend to go back. So let me contribute to making my position. Let it be that, yes, in my time, I was able to, even if it is in the area of the committee that I chaired through the magnanimity of the Right Honorable Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila, through the grace of God and the leadership of the House of Representatives Committee on Judiciary, even if I'm able to make an impact in judicial reforms to better the lives of judicial officers. For instance, part of our...
We could go on and on, Honorable.
Yes, the National Judicial Council have been empowered
we could go on and on.
now
maybe
to make for salaries or for judicial officers. They can review that within 4 years.
There are those who are, on that judiciary thing that you talked about, for instance, there are those who are wondering, how come we're still having this back and forth concerning the independence of the judiciary at the state houses, at the state level, even at the federal level, and all of that. So all those conversations
there is
are
a new
definitely
provision
endless.
to take care of that.
We hope that where it will
you.
sail through finally in all of this conversation. We have to thank you very much, for being a part of our conversation this morning.
It's good to have you.
Right Honorable Onofiok Luke is a member House Ad hoc Committee on Constitutional Review and is a former Speaker, Akwa Ibom State House of Assembly. I was even wondering how that is going to play out in the Houses of Assembly when that time comes. So don't speak to that now. John Mutu is also joined us from Abuja Studio, National Coordinator, Democracy Vanguard. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ian.
Okay. Well, more to come right after now, and that is something that has also been in the news for a while. Please stay with us.